Hey guys, Susan Thomas here, and today we're going to take a deep dive into pickle. Not the kind you eat, the kind you solder with. So today we're going to be doing some soldering, but we're very specifically going to focus on something called pickle, because every time I show you guys how to solder, everybody wants to know about the pickle. I know it's a very strange name for something that you have to use to clean your silver or copper or brass. It's a cleaner. Think of it like Comet, okay? Think of it like a spick and span, something like that. I'm giving you all these brand names, but you know what I mean. You go and you clean your bathroom, or they've got the soap scum and you're trying to clean it off. That's what happens to your metals when you heat them with the torch, when you solder, especially sterling silver, copper as well, and brass as well. But you have to do something called pickling them or cleaning them before you can actually wear them. Also, pickle's important because when you're soldering, if your metals get dirty, your solder won't flow. And if your solder won't flow, it won't hold your pieces together, and they will break at the joint, and then you'll be really sad because you don't think you can solder, but you really can. All you forgot to do was clean your metal with the pickle. So if you could just name it something else, I think it would be less confusing. I don't know why they named it pickle. I really don't. But this one I'm using today is called Spirex. You can see it says granular dry acid compound right there on the front. And I'm going to mix it with some warm water, which I keep in something called a pickle pot, which is really just a tiny crock pot, right here. And that is what I'm going to use to clean my metals. Now I also have all my soldering supplies here today, because in order to get the metal dirty, I actually have to heat it. So I'm just going to solder a few things, and we're going to see how they clean up in the pickle. So what I have here is a fireproof surface. These are just little soldering boards to keep me from burning up this beautiful table that I have here. Then I have my CROSSLOCK tweezer. This is actually called a third hand. It's fantastic. I have a CROSSLOCK too. These little guys keep you from burning your fingers while you're soldering. They also work like a third hand, so you don't have to hold on to the hot metal. And then I have some sterling silver here that's ready to make bangles like the ones I have on, and some copper. And this is flux. We'll probably talk a little bit about that today. Flux is what makes your solder flow into the joint. If you do not have flux, your solder will not flow. In other words, it just won't work, okay? Just think of it this way. It won't work if you don't put flux. Now this kind of flux is a special kind of flux that helps keep your metal clean, so I'm gonna use it sparingly just because I wanna make sure you guys see what happens with the pickle. However, not all fluxes do that. Some flux does not keep your metal clean, it just allows the solder to flow. So depending on the kind you have, you're not gonna have that benefit. I will tell you it's best to have a flux that helps you keep it clean, because the less you have to deal with pickle, the better. Now, next thing I have here, of course, I've got my torch. This is gonna be my soldering torch. It's just a small torch that heats up hot enough to let silver flow. And this is the fuel, butane. So it's a butane torch, really, really simple. And let's see what else. Oh, this is a brass brush, very important little tool for cleaning with your pickle. After I take it out and I clean it off in just some clear water, you actually use this just to kind of scrub it and brighten it back up again. And let's see, I already showed you that. These are copper tongs. We're going to talk about those later. Please do not use pickle without copper tongs. And this is a solder pick, which is very important for picking up my solder and getting it in the right place. So I told you about the pickle pot, told you about this. I think I've mentioned everything in front of me, so I think we're ready to get started. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get myself set up. I really believe that before you start soldering, you're better off to have everything set up and ready to go, so you don't have to go running around trying to find things. So I'm going to go ahead and do my Spirex first. Even though it's kind of like my last step, I'm going to go ahead and make my pickle ready to go so I can just dump everything in there after I solder it. So all you do is just take this. This is called Spirex, and I'll tell you, this is a very strong pickle. It is not to be disposed of in your sink. It is acid, and it will ruin your plumbing. So if you use this, I will tell you, this lasts forever. If it dries out or dehydrates, you can actually just add water and keep using it forever, unless you do something called contaminating it, which we'll talk about later. But so I'm going to set this up following the instructions on the bottle. All I have is warm water here in my little pickle pot, and I'm just going to add about 1/4 cup of this to the water. It's just plain water. So only 2 ingredients, the Spirex, the pickle, and the water. And so sometimes it gets lumpy like this. That's no big deal. I'm just going to pour out some of this in here that's not lumpy. And I'm going to take something from over here. This is a copper tong. The only thing you should ever stick into your pickle besides the pieces you're soldering is a copper tong, because you can actually contaminate your pickle with other items, especially steel tools. A steel tool will actually deposit, if you put it in here, it will deposit steel into your pickle, which will then plate, amazingly, your sterling silver pieces and turn them kind of a pinkish color. I always know when I've contaminated my pickle when I pull a silver piece out of there and it's pink. So you'll know too, believe me, it's very, very obvious. So just always make sure you have a copper tong to stir or grab anything out of your pickle. So I'm just stirring this up. There's really nothing to it. That's it. It's like a really, really simple cake recipe. All right, so I'm just wiping up all this pickle because like I said, this is an acid. It will put holes in your jeans. It's not good to get on your fingers. You should wash your hands if you get out, and it's not good to get on your work surface either. It'll actually make, you know, little marks and stuff on your work surface. So it's just something to be careful with. There are environmentally friendly pickles that can be dumped right out in your yard. You can even make your own pickle. Look it up, there's recipes. You can make your own pickle. I think citric acid is one of the best, you know, make your own pickle type things. So you can do that. Don't feel like you have to use what I'm using here. This is just what we have in stock. It's what I've always used. It works the fastest, in my opinion. So I like it because I'm kind of an impatient person. However, what I don't like about it is it's not biodegradable. So for me, I've used the same pot of pickle for over 2 years. So to me, that is still kind of a conservation type thing because I don't ever pour it out. When it dehydrates, I just add more water. As long as you don't contaminate it, just keep using it. Okay, what's next? Let's see. Here's my solder paste. Now, like I said, this solder paste is great, especially for beginners because it has flux already in it. Flux equals flow. No flux, no flow. Your solder will just turn into a little ball and it will go somewhere, but it will not hold your piece together. So no flux, no flow. The bad part about solder paste is once you heat it too much, the flux is burned off and it won't flow again. That's why I always have more flux around. The other thing about your paste solder is you're not protecting your metal at all. So it's going to get something called oxidization. And oxidization is why we need the pickle. Now, let me show you something. I've got some bracelets on here, and I put them on purpose because I wanted to show you guys what I meant when I'm talking about oxidizing. So I'll pull those off my wrist here. Sterling silver, when you think of sterling silver being this bright, shiny, noble metal, right? With, you know, just the really, really high, I think it's the highest, most dispersive of any metal. It's very, very shiny. So I've got 3 bangles here, and you can see these 2 are nice and shiny. And this one has a lot of black on it. Now that black is actually called oxidization. Now sometimes you like that because you did it on purpose, but sometimes you don't like it because you didn't do it on purpose. That is what we're going to try to get off of our metal when we clean it in the pickle. So if you look at those 3 bangles, see these 2 have no oxidization and this one has some. Now I did that on purpose because I like it, but if you don't like it and you want it to be shiny, then you want to make sure you get it all off of there. Okay, so I'm going to move my torch here. Got some extra silver we'll put out of the way. I'm going to start with this copper piece just because I know copper really oxidizes, and then we'll pop that in the pickle and we'll let that sit for a while we work with our sterling silver pieces. So when you're soldering with solder paste, you always want to put a little bit of it out on your soldering block first. So I will just squeeze a little bit of that out on just a small amount. Now, one of the things I love about paste solder is there's a little lid that you have to put back on and take off. The very first time I sold some of this to somebody, she came back into the store like about 3 weeks later and she says, I have worked with this and worked with this and worked with this and I cannot get anything out of it. I press the end and press it and nothing comes out. So I said, well, did you take the lid off? And she's like, oh. It's just this tiny little lid right here, that little white piece. You do have to take it off, so don't forget about that. It doesn't look like a lid to me, but it is. So I can see how it would be very, very confusing. Some people think they're like those glue where you just clip it off, but it actually unscrews and comes off. Also make sure you put it back on afterwards because this stuff can dry out. So I've got my glasses and my hair pulled back, so I want to talk about the torch a little bit more because people are always asking about these torches. Now, first of all, this is a special torch. It is not like your creme brulee torch. It is actually rated for sterling silver, which has one of the highest melting points of any metal. So you can't just use any torch. I cannot remember the exact temperature, but I believe it's over 1200 degrees that it needs to get to actually make sterling silver solder flow. So that's very important. So make sure just when you're getting your torch that it's rated for sterling silver, then it'll work on all the metals. So this is just a butane torch. If you look down at the bottom right here, there's a little button or a knob. That is where you fill this with butane. See that little gold button right there? I just take the lid off of this. This has got a little spout that you put right onto that little gold piece, and you just press in like so. And you can see it kind of spurted back at me like that. That's because mine's already full. You cannot overfill these. When they're full, it will actually back at you like that and tell you to stop putting butane in there. Now, press that, put that down right there. This button, there's several buttons on here. I think it gets kind of confusing there because they're all red. But this is your on-off switch, and it's the only one in the back except for this one underneath it, which is the safety. That's why they're together. You have to press down the safety to press the on-off button. So I pressed it down, press this button, that comes on. Now when I let go of that button, it turns off. So I have to press my safety down again and press this. If you don't want to exhaust your thumb and hold that down all the time, there's another button on the side. Now it's on the left side of the torch. I'll show it to you here. This is your continuous flame button. You have to pull it back while you have this depressed to make the torch stay on. So safety down, torch on, continuous flame back. Now I can let go and it will stay. Now, if you want to turn it up and down, right here on this other side, the right side of the torch, there's the up and down button. So see, bigger or smaller. Now that small little flame is not going to do anything for you if you're trying to actually do any soldering, so you're going to have to use this one. But maybe you have to look around for a second. You don't want to waste all your butane, but you don't want to turn it off because you're just going to come right back to it. Turn it down for a second so you don't waste your butane. Now, if you want to turn it back off again, this continuous flame button, push it forward, it's off. I will tell you this piece gets very hot. Burn, burn, all from a butane torch. So, and it's not from soldering. I wasn't doing any soldering. It's from going away and thinking everything was fine and coming back and doing something else and not putting away my torch and having it out in my workspace and hitting my hand or reaching over it. That's how I end up doing those types of things. So be very careful with these. When you're done with them, make sure you put them away in a place that's safe and not in your workspace. Okay, so we're ready to solder. So safety first, make sure you wear safety glasses anytime you're working with wire or tools or heat or anything like that. I have done some very silly things to myself by not being careful, so make sure that you're really careful. It's funny how you don't think anything's gonna happen until it does, and then you're like, wow, I wish I'd worn my safety glasses. Okay, so I am set up on my soldering board. I am going to pour just a little tiny bit of this solder paste out. I already had a little bit, but I'm just gonna put some out again just to make sure I've got some there, and put the lid back on my solder paste so it doesn't dry out. There it is. Now I'm using a medium solder paste right now, and what's great about this solder paste is it already has flux in it. So it'll actually flow as long as I don't burn out that flux. And so this is the one I'm going to use because I don't want to use a lot of this flux because this is a self-pickling flux, and if it keeps it too clean, I won't be able to show you guys how the pickle works. So we'll put that to the side. I may have to use some of it to get these things to flow, but we're going to start just with this solder paste that has the flux already in it. So turn on your torch, and we're ready to go. Now I'm starting with a piece of copper. I'm going to be focusing the heat right here where you see that really tight joint. And I'm using copper first because it really oxidizes well. It really gets dark, so you'll really be able to see the action of the pickle and how well it cleans your metal after you solder. All right, so I've just got a little tiny bit of solder paste there. And what I'm gonna do first is start heating my metal. And as I heat it, it's gonna start getting darker. It's gonna change colors. And that's what's called that oxidization. So you see that? Now also, one thing about copper is when it gets a certain color, like that kind of green color, I know I'm ready to add my solder paste because it's hot enough for that solder paste to flow. So I've heated that up, and then I'm going to drop a little bit of that solder paste on there, and I'm just watching for it to flow into that joint, and there it goes. You see it kind of get silvery? like that. And you can actually see the space from here to here. That's where my solder flowed into the joint and then out to either side. And all the rest of that is all dark black oxidized, not pretty copper anymore. So that part is actually the part that I'm trying to clean with the pickle. So I'm gonna grab this with my copper tong, squeeze my little CROSSLOCK third hand there, and then drop this piece down into the pickle. Now, you can see down in that pickle, let me see if I can get this a little bit closer in here. See how it kind of cleared up just a little bit? You know, remember it was kind of almost foamy looking when I put all that pickle in there? Well, that goes away. It actually looks almost clear. If it was in a clear bowl, you would see that it's kind of yellowish, but you can see through your pickle. So put the lid back on, put that over to the side, and now I'm gonna work with my sterling silver. So we're gonna leave that in there for a little while. One thing that's really important about your pickle is you notice I've got it heated up in almost like a little crock pot. I call it a pickle pot. This, the hotter your pickle, the faster it's going to clean your metal. You can use cold pickle. I use cold pickle all the time. However, it takes longer. And you do not wanna leave your pieces in your pickle any longer than you have to clean them, because like I said, it's an acid and it actually can eat away at that solder joint. And if you leave it overnight, 24 hours is way too long. It'll actually make your solder joints brittle and then your pieces will break. So very, very important, maximum 2 hours in the pickle. So yes, you can go out to eat and come back, but no, you can't go to bed and come and pick it up in the morning. That's the rule of pickle. Okay, so next up, I'm gonna work with a piece of sterling silver. Once again, I am not going to use any of my self-pickling flux. I'm just gonna use the pre-flux solder paste so that you really get some oxidization on here. Now, normally I wouldn't do that because I tell you, I like to spend as little time cleaning my pieces up afterwards as possible. But I really want you guys to see how this works. And even with the self-pickling flux, you're gonna get some oxidization. You're always gonna have to pickle. All right, so you can see it kind of darkening up. That's the oxidization. It's kind of a brownish color here. Now it's turning black. I'm looking for that to get a little red so I can solder. Just put a little bit of my solder paste in the spot, and then this should flow a little faster for me. There we go. All right, so that flowed. So here's where you guys see the reason I'm getting a little bit of smoke right now is not a good reason. Actually, the edge of my solder board, I'm kind of going off the edge there onto this piece. So I really need a little bit bigger fireproof surface. So what I'm gonna do is pull this back a little farther so my flame is pointing right here. Normally when I'm at home in my studio, I have a big granite countertop that's 100% flame proof, so there's no way that I could cause any fires, but we're a little limited in here in the studio. So just be careful of that. Make sure you have a big enough fireproof surface for your piece. Okay, so I'm letting this cool off on purpose because I really, really want that oxidization to set in so you guys can see what happens. So there's my solder join. Here is all that oxidized look that I want to get off. One thing I want to explain is the difference between fire scale, which is what this is called. This is called fire scale. And fire stain. Fire stain will not come off in the pickle. Fire scale will. Fire stain is awful. You do not want to do this. That means you overheated your piece so much that the copper that's inside that sterling silver came to the surface, and you can clean it off and it'll come back. And you can clean it off and it'll come back. It's very difficult to get rid of. It requires files and jewelry tools and all kinds of things. So one thing you want to be very careful of is once your solder flows, you pull the heat off so that you don't get that fire stain on there. You can get rid of fire scale in pickle, you can't get rid of fire stain. So if some of you guys have polished up a piece and you had your jewel tool out and you got it so shiny and that kind of pinkish look came back, that's what that is. It's called fire stain. And it's easy to get because a lot of us don't have the skill to solder, or we didn't use enough flux, or it didn't flow, and so you just kept heating and heating and heating and heating, and you actually melted the metal instead of just the solder, and that's when that happens. All right, so I've got one more piece of sterling silver here, and on this one here, I've just got a little bit different shape. You can see it's a little bit more ovaled, rounded. I do this on purpose where I kind of flatten out the top so that you can get that joint really, really tight. And so I'm just going to put this in here. I'm going to use some of my self-pickling flux with this so you guys can see how it doesn't get quite so oxidized when you use the flux. Now remember, not all flux is self-pickling, so unless you have this one that's self-pickling. It actually says right here, look. All right, so right here you can see on this, it says self-pickling liquid soldering flux. So it'll say right on it if it's self-pickling. This particular brand, Aqua Flux, I know is self-pickling and it's easy to find. It's the one I always use. I honestly don't think pickle's confusing. I guess a lot of people do. I thought flux was the most confusing thing ever. When I first started soldering, I actually learned how to do it, went home and did not do it forever because I bought like 12 different kinds of flux. And so I understand why people want brand names. So there you go, Aqua Flux, just get it, it's self-pickling. Now when I do self-pickling flux, I actually flux the entire piece of metal before I start soldering. So to do that, and you'll see this will stay cleaner. To do that, I'm just gonna turn my torch on and I'm gonna heat the whole piece. Let me get this out of the way so I don't get that hot. I'm gonna heat the whole piece. So I'm just very gently going all the way around the piece and starting to heat it. And then once I kind of get it a little bit warm, I'm just gonna start adding some flux. And it'll kind of start looking like sugar, like powdered sugar all the way around the piece. Kind of see how it's doing that. And I just kind of do the whole, the thing about soldering is you're really supposed to heat the whole piece before you start soldering. So this is another good way to, if you're feeling impatient, to know you've heated the whole piece like a bangle like this, because heat actually changes the structure of metal. And if you don't heat the whole piece, some of it will end up being softer and some will be harder. And that doesn't seem like a big deal, but it'll be a big deal when you go to hammer out your bangle. Like I'm using a dead soft wire. When you heat it, it's like there's these little crystal molecules inside. So if you think of all my little fingers as little crystal molecules, when it's hard, when the wire's hard after you've hammered it, they're really, really tight together. But when you heat it up, they kind of soften. And so it's a much more kind of go with the flow, loosey-goosey piece of metal, and it's easier to form. So it's great to heat it up because it's easier to form, but you actually have to hammer it to harden it. And if you're trying to round out a bangle and one side's still hard because you haven't heated it and the other side's soft, then one side will be really easy to work with and the other side will not. So that's why you heat the whole piece. All right, so let me turn this on. That's just extemporaneous information. Okay. So let's get a little bit of solder paste on here. And now I'm just gonna heat my whole piece again. And after I kind of get heated up, I'm just gonna concentrate in that area where I'm soldering. And when that flux kind of goes clear, I know I am ready to add my solder paste, which should flow really quickly because I have added so much flux, which equals flow. There we go. Take the heat off. Now you can see how much cleaner that is. See, I've got a little bit of fire stain right here. Okay, sorry, did I say fire stain? Okay, what I meant right here, I've got a little bit of fire scale right here, not fire stain, and a little bit of fire scale here where I missed with my flux. And so, but you can see it's actually a lot cleaner. So pickle is what keeps your metal, or gets your metal, clean. All right, so I'm just gonna grab this and drop that down into my pickle. And see, that didn't go all the way in, but I could push it in with my tongs and bring to the side. Okay, so we've had these in here, I would say the copper's been in there for maybe 10 minutes. So it's probably gonna be clean because I was careful, I didn't overheat my metal, and because I heated my pickle. So what I'm gonna do is just move my pieces out of the way here. And now I've got my brass brush. Let me get that out of the way too. And I'm gonna bring in just some paper towels. Don't ever have, I usually keep like a towel in my lap when I'm doing this. I don't usually keep paper towels around, but that's why they were way over there, because heat and towels and paper, not good. So that's out of the way now, so I don't have to worry about it. After you take this out of the pickle, let's pull this into the picture so you can really see what we're doing here. Take a little bus. All right, pull this into the picture. This is just a little quench bowl right here that I'm gonna use, not a quench bowl, but just clear water so I can clean things up. All right, so I'm gonna start with my copper because that was the first one I did. I'm gonna pull this out. I want you guys to look at it. See how it's not brown or black anymore, but there's a little bit of pink on there? That'll come off with a brass brush. So I'm just gonna clean this off. in the clear water. And now I can touch it with my fingers. And then let me move this out of the way again, just for a second. Dry it off, like so. And now, you see, it's kind of dull. That's where I heated, and this part's still shiny where I didn't heat. Watch what happens when I hit it with the brass brush. Isn't that amazing? So the pickle cleaned all that off, and the brass brush just shines it right back up again. This is one of my favorite jewelry making tools. I didn't know about brass brushes for a long, long time. I just used steel wool or whatever I had, polishing cloth, anything. But this brass brush almost polishes it enough so you don't have to do anything else to it. Now, of course, this is silver solder on copper, so I'm gonna have to go back in and file and do things to kind of clean up that joint. But yeah, that's about as clean as you can get it. I might even go over the rest of it with the brass brush so it looks pretty uniform, like that. So that is ready to be hammered and formed into a bangle shape. And I would use a bracelet mandrel or something like that to do what I want to do with it. But that one's ready. So let's check out our sterling silver. So I'm going to go back into my pickle here and grab out this one. This is the one that I did without any, oops, come here, little bugger. So this is the one that I did without any of the self-pickling flux. I only used the flux-filled solder paste on this one. And you can see it got really, really clean. I didn't overheat my metal, so I don't have any fire stain. It's just kind of dull here, but that's clearly ready to come out of the pickle because there's no dark fire scale on there. So just dip that into your clear water, clean that off, and put it onto your towel or something to dry it. And see, I'm trying to see if it looks like join looks pretty good actually. I wasn't sure if I got my join really good. I was focusing so much on getting it all ugly with fire scale that I didn't pay too much attention to how well my solder flowed. So then we're just going to clean that off, and you can see that got really shiny. It's easier to tell with the copper, but see that got shiny again, and there's no fire scale. My join is not my best join ever, but I believe it's going to hold. So you really don't want to have a lot of, like see here, it looks like I didn't quite get it to flow right there, but it's holding pretty well. So then once again, this is ready to form into a bangle. And it's going to be nice and shiny, even right there at that join, just like those. So there's that one. Now this other one is the one that I did, and it's been there the least amount of time. It's probably only been in there a few minutes, but let me look at it. I'll pull it back out here. It does not want to come out. This is why you really want to make sure you have a copper tong, because sometimes they don't want to come out. I think I still have just a little bit of fire scale on there, but I think we're good. So once again, not my best joint ever, but we're gonna go with it. When you're soldering, generally speaking, like you can see that I didn't quite get that tight, but the solder flowed really, really well on this one, probably because I had more flux in it. When you're soldering, the tighter your join, the better your solder is gonna flow. And I had a little bit of a loose join there, I think, because I was busy messing around with the silver and I wasn't paying a ton of attention, but it still flowed, and you can still see how the flux and the pickle have kept this really, really clean. So now what I'll do is I'll hit that with a Dremel or something and just kind of smooth out my join that I made, and you will never know. Never know. Okay, so once again, super, super clean metals after you put them into the pickle. Pretty cool, right? So those are ready to make bangles. They're gonna hold together. A lot of times if I do one like this, one thing that's fun about soldering, when you first start, you're gonna get joins that look like this, or even worse. You know, they're just gonna be like kind of chunky and messy, and maybe you'll get too much solder paste on it and you'll get a little bit of a lump there. And the fun part about that is, you know what? Make them crazy, hammer them. You know, use some oxidization solution like a liver of sulfur or something. You know, really go crazy with them, hammer them, make them fun, and don't worry about how your very first piece looks, because you're going to be able to You're going to be able to get better at this. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it, the better your joints. Like eventually I finally got to a point where I soldered so much, like when I'm in a groove, you can't even see where that solder joint is right from the very beginning. And so you'll get there, but don't feel like your first pieces, as long as they're holding together and you didn't over pickle them, they're great. So just make it your own. So we really took a deep dive into this pickle, but we also kind of dove into a lot about soldering, like the really deep underground things that nobody tells you about soldering. So hopefully you guys have learned a few things. And if you watch my other soldering videos, you'll see how to do it. And then maybe if you come back to this video, you'll maybe understand some of the questions that you had. So this is my pickle that I used today. This was the star of the show. I used a pickle called Sparex. It's a granular dry acid compound that you mix with water to make something that actually cleans your metal, cleans the fire scale off of your pieces. This was my fireproof surface that I used. These are just little soldering boards that I was using to make sure that I didn't burn anything up today. I almost did, but you know, we did pretty well. I had my third hand and my CROSSLOCK tweezer to hold on to all of my metals so I don't burn my hands. Very important. Now let's see what else we've got here. Pickle pot was also very important, so I'm going to pull him into the picture. This is a pickle pot. Now I know it looks like a tiny crock pot, and that's because it is, but the pickle pot is essentially just to keep your pickle warm, because the warmer your pickle, the faster it works. Our brass brush, let me pull this down here, brass brush, that's what I used to kind of wipe off or brush off the metal after I was done. And we had our very important copper tongs, which is the only thing that you should put into your pickle besides your pieces that you're soldering, because it can actually contaminate it. This is just another CROSSLOCK tweezer that we used, and this was my solder pick, which is steel and will contaminate your pickle. Do not stick it in the pickle. Let's see what else I've got here. Oh, we did talk about our self-pickling flux, which we also used. Remember, this is just another type of pickle, another way to keep your metals clean. And then we had our torch and our butane, which we used to solder. And let's see, anything else? Oh, yeah, very important, your solder paste. Now, once again, this also is a solder paste that has flux in the mix. So if you use this, you do not have to have another flux unless you overheat your solder paste, and then you'll need some. It's always good to have some flux available. And I think that'll be just about it. I did have some water to clean off after I brought it to the pickle, because you don't want to get it on your hands. And then, of course, always wear your safety glasses. Never ever do anything with a flame or fire without your safety glasses. Almost more important if you're watching somebody solder than if you're soldering yourself, but you absolutely want to have these on. This is a great pair because it protects your eyes from both sides, and it can fit over your regular glasses. So if you guys get all this, you should be ready to go, ready to get started soldering. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys would like to pick up some supplies like the ones I work with today, check out the links down below. What other questions do you have about soldering? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time.